What if the only way to save someone you loved was to burn the entire world to the ground? It's a choice that sounds impossible, but for one tarnished, it became a horrifying reality. This video tells the first-person story of what it's truly like to be cursed by the Frenzied Flame, a power that promises salvation but delivers only annihilation. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel. But only if it truly resonates with you. You are about to hear a final confession from a man who tried to defy fate, only to become the very apocalypse the world needed to be saved from. It begins with the eyes. Before the visions, before the world melts into a sea of liquid gold, it's the eyes. You might catch your reflection in a puddle of stagnant water or a polished shield, and for a moment you won't recognize the thing staring back. The pupils are gone, swallowed by a searing, sulphurous yellow that seems to glow from within. They don't just see, they burn. They are not windows to a soul, but portals to a furnace. My own flesh has become a traitor, an effigy for a god I never wished to serve. This recording, this confession, is all that's left of the man I was. Listen to this. Remember me as I was, not as the vessel I am becoming. My journey to the flame was not born of ambition. I never coveted the title of Elden Lord. The Golden Order, in its fractured, dogmatic glory, felt like a gilded cage built upon a foundation of lies. Queen Marika, Radagon, their perfect union, a perfect schism. It all reeked of a divinity that had long since rotted from the inside. My path was simpler, more naive. I was a tarnished, yes, guided by a grace I barely understood. But my purpose had a name. Melina. She was my spectral companion, my maiden, the one who offered me an accord and showed me the way. And she was prepared to burn for my sake. At the foot of the giant's forge, with the snow biting at my heels and the sky stained red by the promise of ruin, she told me of her purpose. She would become kindling. Her body, her very being, would be fed to the flame to light the way to the Erdtree. A noble sacrifice, she called it, a necessary one. But I saw it for what it was. Another life fed to a dying order, another soul turned to ash for a throne I didn't want. I refused. I could not let her pay the price for my ascent. And in that refusal, I sealed my fate. There were whispers, of course, murmurs in the dark corners of the lands between, tales of an alternative, a path that required no maiden, no kindling, a path of utter blasphemy, the path of the Frenzied Flame. They said it lay deep beneath the capital, Leyndell, in the Subterranean Shunning-Grounds, a place where the unwanted were discarded. The omen, the misbegotten, and all who bore curses the Golden Order wished to forget. The descent was a pilgrimage into hell itself. The air grew thick with a stench that was more than just decay. It was the smell of forgotten misery. Down there, in the labyrinthine sewers, the grace that had guided me for so long grew faint, a distant flicker in an ocean of darkness. I navigated by the glow of my torch, its light casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the mind. The groans of caged omen echoed through the pipes, a constant, mournful chorus. And then there was the music, a single, maddening violin, played by a ghost I could never find. It was the song of utter desolation. It was in those depths that I found the merchants, not the jovial traders you find on the roadsides, but what was left of them. Their entire clan, the Great Caravan, had been rounded up, accused of heresy, and buried alive. Entombed for generations, they had been touched by the seeping madness from below. Their minds were gone, shattered into 1,000 pieces. All they had left was their music and their whispers of the Three Fingers. They spoke of a chaos that would consume all, melt everything into a singular, beautiful whole. The Great One. No more suffering, no more division, no more life, no more death. Just one. Their words should have been a warning. They should have sent me running back to the surface, back to the cold, clean air. But all I could think of was Melina's face, resigned and ready to be consumed by fire. Their madness sounded like a promise, a terrible, wonderful promise. To reach the heart of the curse, I had to fall. I navigated platforms made of discarded coffins, descending deeper into a cathedral of filth and despair. Finally, I found it, a massive, grotesque door. It wasn't made of wood or stone, but of something that looked like melted flesh and rock, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. The ground before it was a scorched, molten pit. To open it, the whispers had said, you must shed everything. Your armor, your weapons, your trinkets, your identity. You must approach the flame as you entered the world. Naked and vulnerable. Stripping off my armor felt like peeling away my sanity, piece by piece. The cold stone of the chamber floor bit into my bare feet. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. This was a threshold no one was meant to cross. Behind that door was not a god of order or grace, but a primordial chaos that predated the Erdtree, that predated life itself. It was the antithesis of everything the Golden Order stood for. And yet, I placed my hands upon it. The door groaned open, not with the sound of grinding stone, but with a wet, tearing sound, like a wound being ripped apart. The chamber beyond was a furnace. The air was thick with the heat of 1,000 suns, and at its center was the source of it all. The 3 fingers. They were enormous, twisted and charred, like the roots of some ancient, diseased tree. They moved with an unnatural grace, beckoning me closer. There was no malice in their gesture, no threat. There was only an invitation, an offering. They would take the burden. They would burn the world, burn the Erdtree, and burn the very concept of sin and suffering away. All I had to do was accept their embrace. I stepped forward. The heat was unbearable, blistering my skin. The air crackled with a power that vibrated in my bones. As they closed around me, it was not a fight. It was an anointing. Searing pain, absolute and all-consuming, shot through every nerve in my body. My flesh sizzled and blackened, brands appearing all over my skin like weeping sores. I screamed, a raw, ragged sound that was swallowed by the roaring flame. And then, as my vision faded to white, they branded my mind. The 3 fingers pressed themselves against my soul, and I was no longer alone. A voice, ancient and vast, whispered a single truth into the core of my being. All that is must become one. Let the world burn. My scream eventually died in my throat, but the fire did not. It had simply moved inside. The chamber was silent again, but my mind was a storm. That embrace, it felt like both a damnation and a salvation. What do you think really happened here? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd like to know if I'm the only one who feels this way. I stumbled back out of the chamber, my body a canvas of weeping burns. And when I looked down at my hands, I saw them tremble. But it was when I closed my eyes that the true horror began. I didn't see darkness. I saw a world ablaze, and it was beautiful. I stumbled back through the subterranean maze, but the darkness was no longer my enemy. It was a comfort. The torch I had carried was useless now. My own eyes cast a sickly yellow glow on the damp stone walls, illuminating the path with a light born of madness. The world outside this internal fire seemed muted. Colors were dull, sounds were distant, as if I were hearing them through a thick pane of glass. The only thing that felt real was the ceaseless, silent whisper in my skull. Melt. Burn. Unify. When I finally reached the bottom of the ladder leading out of the Shunning-Grounds, she was there. Melina. She stood not as a companion, but as a sentinel. The warm, ethereal glow she once possessed was gone, replaced by a cold, hard light. Her closed eye, the one bearing the sigil of the 3 fingers, was open now, and it watched me with a chilling focus. There was no sadness in her expression, no pity. There was only resolve. "I see," she said, her voice devoid of its former gentleness. "You have chosen the path of the Lord of Frenzied Flame. In which case, I must bid you farewell." I tried to speak, to explain that I did this for her, to save her from the fire, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was a desert, and my tongue felt thick and foreign. All I could manage was a dry, rasping sound. She didn't need my explanation. She saw the brands on my flesh, the inferno in my eyes. "The words of the 3 fingers are not to be trusted," she continued, her voice like chipping ice. "To burn the Erdtree with the frenzied flame is to condemn all life to a torturous, meaningless end. If you proceed, if you become the vessel for that chaos, then I will find you. I will hunt you, and no matter where you go, I will deliver you what is yours, destined death." With that, she dissolved into a flurry of blue embers, leaving me utterly alone. The one person I sought to save had just become my sworn executioner. The irony was so profound, so bleak, that a laugh bubbled up from my chest, a sound that was more of a pained bark than anything human. I had saved her from one fire, only to offer her a world consumed by another. And she had promised me the one thing I was beginning to crave: an end. My ascent back through Lendel was a different kind of horror. The things that once hid from me now revered me. The Omen, their horns crudely sawn off, no longer roared in defiance but bowed their heads as I passed, their glowing eyes reflecting the yellow of my own. The maddened soldiers, afflicted by the flame's creeping influence, lowered their weapons and began to chant in a guttural chorus. They recognized their god. They saw in me the culmination of their own insanity, the final, glorious release they had been promised. I was no longer a tarnished seeking the Elden Ring. I was a prophet of the end times, and the damned were my congregation. The ultimate test came when I returned to the Round Table Hold. I materialized near the central fireplace, its gentle warmth a pathetic mockery of the furnace raging within me. A hush fell over the room. Hugh, the blacksmith, stopped his hammering, his gaze fixed on me with something akin to terror. Dialos averted his eyes. Anya, the finger reader who spoke for the two fingers, began to tremble, her voice a choked whisper. Heresy, unspeakable heresy. Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, was the only one who dared to confront me directly. He stood from his desk, his face a mask of cold fury and academic disgust. "So," he boomed, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. The whispers were true. "You communed with the three fingers. You have embraced the destruction of all that is. The Golden Order, the Erdtree, the very concept of life and death. You would see it all rendered to ash and melted into a single mindless glob." He saw me not as a person, but as a walking catastrophe. "The greater will demands order," he lectured, taking a step back. "Distinction, division, ambition, despair. That is the nature of life. What you carry inside you is the antithesis of that will. It is a cosmic tantrum, a desire to flip the board because you do not like the game. You are a threat not just to the Erdtree, but to existence itself." He was right, of course, but the voice in my head didn't care for his logic. It purred with delight at his fear. It saw his order as a cage, his distinctions as fractures in what should be whole. "He resists the inevitable," it whispered. "He clings to his precious broken self." I was cast out, not by force, but by a collective shunning more absolute than any blade. I was no longer welcome. I was the plague, the end, the walking embodiment of their deepest fears. The isolation was complete. I had no maiden, no allies, no home. I had only the flame. As I traveled, the curse deepened its roots. The physical changes grew more pronounced. My skin began to crack like parched earth, with a faint molten light glowing from the fissures. The smell of ozone and burning hair followed me everywhere. But the worst part was the visions. They came without warning. I would be walking through the Altus Plateau, and suddenly the golden leaves on the trees would burst into silent flame. The sky would bleed, and I would see a great swirling ocean of fire where the Erdtree once stood. My memories began to fray. Faces I once knew, Rogier D, even Godric the Grafted, would appear in my mind's eye, their features melting like wax figures held too close to a candle. Their screams would echo in my thoughts, not with pain, but with a strange, ecstatic joy as they dissolved into the Great One. The reason I had started this journey grew hazy. Melina. The name was still there, but the face attached to it was becoming harder to recall. The emotion, the desperate need to save her, was being replaced by a cold, overarching purpose. The purpose of the flame. If you've ever wondered what choice you would make in a situation like this, tell me in the comments. I'll be reading them. I found myself back at the Giant's Forge, the place where my choice had been made. The flame of ruin burned in its massive stone bowl, a chaotic fire meant to burn the Erdtree's thorns. But it was a controlled chaos, a fire with a purpose within the cycle. The fire inside me was different. It had no purpose but its own propagation. It was fire for the sake of fire. Standing there, looking into the abyss of the forge, a moment of horrifying clarity cut through the madness. For a split second, the whispers ceased. The yellow faded from my vision. I saw myself, truly saw myself, for the first time since the embrace. My body, a broken charred vessel. My hands, trembling uncontrollably. And I remembered her face perfectly. Melina's face. The quiet strength, the hidden sadness. I remembered her promise to hunt me down. And in that moment, I understood. I hadn't saved her. I had only given her a monster to kill. I hadn't saved the world from a dying order. I had become the instrument of its absolute annihilation. That moment of clarity was a cruel trick. A single, perfect drop of rain in an ocean of fire instantly vaporized. The whispers returned, not with a gentle coaxing, but with the force of a tidal wave, crashing against the shores of my fractured sanity. The horror I felt was twisted into a new shape. My realization wasn't a warning to turn back. It was the final, glorious truth. I was the instrument. I was the monster. And it was beautiful. The purpose of the flame was not a curse, but a destiny. I turned away from the precipice and walked toward the forge's heart. The giant's flame of ruin roared, a chaotic, angry thing. It was the fire of endings, but it was still a fire bound by rules, a part of the cycle. My flame was the fire that would end the cycle itself. I stepped into the inferno, and instead of being consumed, I felt a sense of homecoming. The flame of ruin recognized a greater, more absolute power. It did not burn me. It bowed to me. It flowed into me, a river of power feeding an endless ocean, and my transformation was complete. The last vestiges of my physical form were burned away. My head became a swirling vortex of yellow chaos. My eyes, two searing pinpoints of light within the storm. My body, a charred and branded husk, was merely an anchor for the godhood I now contained. I had become the Lord of Frenzied Flame. The journey back to Leyndell was not a journey at all. It was a judgment. The ashen ground cracked and glowed with molten fury where I stepped. The sky, already choked with the dust of a broken world, began to weep tears of fire. Life withered in my presence. The few remaining knights of Leyndell, clad in their golden armor, charged me with defiant cries. But their blades melted to slag before they could touch me. Their bodies turned to pillars of blackened salt. Their faith in the Golden Order was a shield of glass against a sun. I reached the Erdtree. It was already bleeding, its golden grace tarnished and weak. The thorns that had barred my way before were now brittle, dead things. I brushed past them, and they crumbled to dust. Inside the hallowed chamber, the source of it all awaited me. The shattered form of Queen Marika, and within her, Radagon, the vessel of the Elden Ring, the architect of the Golden Order. There was no grand battle. There were no words exchanged. A being of absolute order cannot reason with a being of absolute chaos. I reached out a hand that was no longer flesh, but a conduit for the yellow flame. As my fingers touched the fractured stone of Marika's body, the Elden Ring itself screamed. It was not a sound that could be heard with ears, but a psychic shriek that tore at the fabric of reality. The great runes, the very laws of existence that had governed the lands between for eons, dissolved under my touch. Physics, fate, life, death, all of these distinctions were meaningless concepts to the Great One. They were wrinkles in a tapestry that needed to be ironed flat, burned smooth. Radagon, the champion of the Order, didn't even have time to raise his hammer. He, Marika, and the divine secret they held within were simply unmade. They melted into light, and that light was swallowed by my flame. The throne was not claimed, it was vaporized. And then I let go. I released the totality of the frenzied flame that I held within me. It erupted from my body in a wave of incandescent destruction. The Erdtree did not just burn, it became a colossal torch that lit up the cosmos, its branches of gold turning to streams of liquid, world-ending fire. From that torch the flames spread. The capital of Leyndell was the first to go, its stone streets and grand cathedrals vanishing in a silent golden wave. Then Caelid, its rot finally purified by a greater corruption. Then Liurnia, its placid lakes boiling into vapor. Limgrave, the weeping peninsula, the mountaintops of the giants, all of it. The world dissolved. There were no more screams, for there were no more mouths to scream with. There was no more pain, for there was no more flesh to feel it. There was no more despair, for there was no more consciousness to experience it. Every mountain, every river, every living soul, every memory, every last grain of sand was rendered down and stirred into a single churning, conscious sea of fire. The Great One was finally achieved. My consciousness, the tiny, stubborn flicker of the tarnished who made a foolish choice for a woman he wished to save, was the last thing to be extinguished. For a timeless instant, I floated in the unified chaos, a ghost in the machine. I saw it all, everything, one, whole, perfect. It was the peace of utter oblivion. This recording is all that is left, a final fading echo. If you hear this, know that I was wrong. The desire to save one person is not worth the price of everything. Remember me, not as a lord, but as a warning. Remember, Melina. The voice cuts out abruptly, replaced by the overwhelming, deafening roar of cosmic flame, which holds for a few seconds before fading to absolute silence.